Hey guys, welcome back to Pistons Talk Podcast. I have a very special guest with me today. We got Zariq back. A lot of people loved the last time you were on. I think last time we talked it was pre-draft. So it's been a minute. Welcome back to the show, man.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. Last time was a lot of fun, so I'm glad to be back on here. A lot has happened. We have a whole off season of roster construction and a new coach. Did we have JB by last time?
I don't even think we had a coach.
I don't think we did. So yeah, it's been a lot that's happened in the last like 2 months or so. So I'm excited to catch up.
For sure, man. Like always, I always like to give guests the floor to plug themselves. So I know you have stuff you work on your personal Twitter. Also know you run a website, co-run a website called Bully Ball. So floor is yours to plug it for everyone listening right now.
Yeah, so with Bully Ball, it is my and my friend Jake and Mike's creation. We kind of came together and made it to be like this hub of sports content. Initially, we were going to make it more national sports, but right now we're pretty focused towards Detroit sports in general. But we're expanding. It's generally just like a place where you can find like all of our thoughts on sports, whether it be like the X's and O's or like personal stories. Like we have the first story actually we ever had was a interview with Tyler Conklin from 2021 about everything back in like 2020 with like the whole Black Lives Matter movement and things like that, and like his perspective being in Minneapolis as a tight end at that time. um, just things like that. And then I also had done a story not too long ago with a story about this kid Ezekiel who was homeless and got to visit a Pistons game. It's a great story if you want to check it out. And then I also still do reporting and photography as well. I do pretty much anything you can name. Not gonna lie, I've done video, photography, writing. I try to do it all. So I like my most recent article. I want to say was predicting Trajan Langdon's offseason poorly, I should say. I got the Tim Hardaway Jr. thing right, but that was that was pretty much it. Um, but I I just generally like to do as much content as I can there. We'll be starting up Pistons coverage again pretty soon. I do photography and writing at Pistons games, so you can find me there pretty much. Hopefully, like any home game, you can probably find me there. So yeah, we have a lot going on, a lot coming. And then our website is bullyball.net. And then we're currently working on a Substack. So all of our website content right now is going to go to the Substack. But for right now, you can find us at bullyball.net and then on all socials at Real Bullyball.
That's awesome, man. You guys are killing it. I know I was scrolling like really late at night and I saw a Tigers meme because the Tigers have just been like so hot. Even though they lost today, they've been
Yeah.
really exciting to watch. A lot of people in the city are really excited about that. But always like to give people the floor. And I know how hard you work. And I mean, you did break the jersey number for Ron Holland, by the way. Let's say it's
That
something,
was
man.
Yeah, I mean, I've done like actual reporting, like with the whole Monty Williams situation back in June, and I feel like the most traction I got was about a jersey number. So that really goes to show you what people care about sometimes. But no, it's yeah, it's a lot of work, but I'm hoping to continue to grow and make more content that is more impactful than a jersey number this year. But you never know.
I'm sure you will, man. I'm sure you will. I remember reading the Monty stuff and the jersey number thing. I laughed because Pistons fans are so weird. Like, how do you know? You're making it up. I'm like, I got it from his stories. You're not a reporter. I'm like, dude, like, shut the up sometimes.
I remember like this one guy was like, I think he DM'd Ron's like girlfriend or something and was like, "Is Ron changing his number?" And then like he got a response. He was like, "Okay, now I know." I was like, "Okay, you didn't have to do that." Like, and if you're watching, please don't DM like family members of players. Like, it's just not something that's really necessary, especially about a jersey change. It's just we
Yeah,
can
I
avoid
mean,
doing that.
I've had family members DM me, some nice, some not so nice.
Yeah.
Uh it's a whole circle. I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole because if I do, people are gonna say, "Oh, who was it? Who was it? Who was it?" Not telling you.
Yeah.
But I did want to kind of shift focus to ESPN. Now they've done stuff in terms of like win projection with the Pistons, where they had them winning 20 games this season, which I kind of disagree with.
Mhm.
But they did a survey recently with who is going to be the best player in 5 years. And I was really surprised. Ron Holland didn't get a single vote, Czar. Not a single vote. What are your thoughts on that?
Honestly, I'm not very surprised. I think this draft class is one that a lot of people, even now, don't know a whole lot about. Like, I remember going into the draft class, I'm not necessarily like a huge draft person. Like, don't get me wrong, I'll do my due diligence in terms of like knowing, because cover the Pistons generally, like where the Pistons will be drafting, and then I'll generally look at like second round guys, like who could be like the surprises of the draft. But by no means am I a draft expert. I had more questions about the draft this year than I have ever had in like my years of covering and talking about the Detroit Pistons. And I think it's really just because people don't know. Like, there's no real like star player. Like, it was billed as Alex Sarr, but he, I mean, obviously early, but like didn't have the summer league performance to really back it up. And even then, his hype is not even comparable to like a Paulo or a Chet a few years ago. So it doesn't surprise me that someone like Ron Holland, coming from the G League Ignite, which is a system that's shutting down, like it will not be running anymore. It doesn't surprise me that a lot of people don't really know much about Ron. I think a lot of people's expectations with the G League peaked with Jalen Green, and then Scoot was kind of remotely close to that general level. Because I remember that 2021 class had Kuminga, Isaiah Todd, Jalen Green, all come from the G League system. But 2022, it was a little more mixed. Like, it was a whole debate about like Scoot and Wemby and everything like that in the beginning of the draft process. But Scoot was one of those prospects that's such an anomaly. You know what I mean? Like, he's one of those guys that, like, similar to Ja in the 2019 class, like those are guys that like you don't see very often. So Scoot, standing out wasn't necessarily because people were checking for the G League Ignite. It was more so just name recognition and seeing highlights and stuff like that. Ron Holland didn't really get the same luck, and he averaged pretty good numbers in the G League this year. He had a decent summer league performance. It's just the fact that that G League team didn't really win many games. And this draft class really has no hype or real coverage, especially coming from the Wemby like high. You know what I mean? Like, it was a serious high of draft coverage and draft talk and what's the future of the NBA going to look like. That like the very next year, looking at like what comes next, whoever it was is like, as long as there's not another Wemby in this class, it was never going to be able to compare. And I feel like people were just kind of on a low. So I think honestly the best player, and I who did they have as the best player in the draft? I wasn't able to check this out.
Okay, so Reed Shepard had 8 votes. Stephon Castle had 3 votes. Donovan Clingan had 2 votes. Nikola Topic had 2 votes. Matas Pizzelis, Dalton Connect, and Bob Carrington each got a vote.
Okay. So Reed Shepard checks out because Reed, leading up to the draft, was someone who, I mean, I knew a lot of draft guys that liked him, but I didn't really hear of much hype about Reed Shepard. Summer league performance, and all of a sudden, like, it's a lot of Reed Shepard hype, and was he Cocaine Curry? Like, that's what they call him, right? So I think a lot of this is really just recency bias, and I think it's very likely that ranking will age really poorly, and it's simply just because a lot of times, like on platforms like this, people will get to like talking about, okay, you have to talk about the draft because the draft's coming up, or, like we have to rank who's going to be the best player. And you might not know, like it's one of those classes where like you probably don't know as much information as you did like last year, or even like this upcoming year with guys like Cooper Flagg. Like, it's one of those classes that really didn't get the proper coverage and proper insight. So it doesn't surprise me that guys like Ron Holland, who amongst, like the draft sickos, like the draft experts out there, was seen as like highest ceiling in the draft, doesn't really get the same by like the general basketball and sports population, because nobody really paid attention to the draft this year. There's more attention on the WNBA draft with like Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, etc., but not towards the NBA draft. So I really feel like the best player in this class probably didn't get a vote.
Yeah, it's kind of wild because like I'll say the only person that I've had on this podcast that was pounding his fist on the table was Hoop Intellect. he told me, he's like, Ron Holland, highest ceiling, could be the best player in the draft if the shot develops. Like, it's not even close. Even like I saw Jonathan Wasserman from Bleacher Report had him as like his number one on his big board. So I think what you said is fair in terms of just like people really didn't know because there was so much international players out there. And then you also had like G League Ignite guys, and not a whole lot of people watch the G League, and watching the G League can kind of be kind of a headache because it's just like, oh, is it on a YouTube stream or is it on a Facebook page or is it going to be on ESPN Plus this day? It's just I can understand why maybe ESPN wasn't the highest on Ron Holland because there's like no like clear evidence of him possibly developing a jump shot. I think Fred Vincent could work his magic personally. I'm kind of praying he can, but doesn't really surprise me whatsoever that ESPN is low on another Pistons prospect.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised at all. I do think if all goes well, it will probably age pretty poorly because I really don't see why Ron Holland can't even be considered like a top 3 guy from this draft. I mean, he was drafted 5th overall. It shouldn't really be a hot take to say he could be one of the best players, if not the best player in the draft. But he has all the physical tools needed, and he has a lot of the intangibles needed in order to be a really productive NBA player. It's just like how high will his ceiling actually be versus like where it's projected to be. So a lot of this stuff's like a waiting game. And with prospects, I always have a hard time like getting like riled up or, like being like, oh, how can you not do this? Unless they're like a clear cut, like, just absolute generational talent. Like I considered Cade a generational talent in the 2021 NBA draft class. I don't think there's guys like Cade that like grow on trees. Because if you can name me a guy since the 2021 draft class that's comparable to Cade, I'd be wrong. He wouldn't be generational, but there hasn't been anybody since Cade that's really comparable. Like before him, there was Tyrese Halliburton, who kind of gets a little similar of love, but like it's not necessarily the same thing. You know what I mean? So I really feel like guys like that, guys like Victor, maybe even a guy like Cooper Flagg, like those are guys like if they're not talked about properly and if they're not ranked properly, it's a little easier to be like, okay, like what are we talking about here? But when it comes to a guy like Ron Holland, like you and I probably know, like, okay, it's possible for him to like be the best player in the draft. And like people aren't taking into consideration his defense. And, like if his shot comes along, that's really all he's missing. But most people don't really take that into consideration. They just look at how he is and they look at like the projected growth on a pretty like pessimistic level so that it's not really, tangible that he's going to be the best player in the draft.
Yeah, like let's just say he wasn't in Detroit. Let's say he was in San Antonio. Guarantee you would have got a vote.
Oh, okay, that part too. Yeah, I mean, honestly, the Pistons, I would like to say get an unfair shake at this, but in all honesty, it's kind of earned at this point that like they don't really get the same love and same like, oh, well, now they're in this system, like, they have a serious chance to like reach their maximum potential. Cause like, I mean, even as of last year, you had a guy like Jaden Ivey who was seen as like a blue chip prospect, like on the bench, uncertain minutes. You know what I mean? Like it hasn't been a system historically where players really maximize their potential. It's a thing amongst all Pistons fans that guys reach their potential once they leave here, like the whole Dinwiddie, Chris Middleton thing. So I can't fault them. That's the unfortunate part. I can't really fault like ESPN or just the general consensus for not believing in Detroit's development system so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair. I mean, I know this is completely off topic, but I saw one of my Facebook memories the other day, and I was just like, I wanted to post it on Twitter so bad, but I didn't feel like getting roasted. I'd probably still be getting roasted. I compared Henry Ellison to Kevin Love when I was like younger. I was like, man, that thing aged poorly. Glad no one saw that.
No, I mean, everybody's had those takes. I remember amongst a lot of people who now would not claim this, like Sekou was the next Giannis or something, So
yeah, it's pretty. Sekou's the next Giannis. I remember being in live streams like this and podcasts like this. People telling me that Tyrese Halliburton's shot wouldn't translate. It's just like, man, come on. I want to kind of stick with national pungence. People might have saw it because I accidentally put it on the screen, but Bleacher Report had a top 5 list, which is a little bit more positive, a little bit more favorable to the Pistons. And I'm going to put it on the screen and we can kind of react to it. So they had their top 5 players ready to explore into stardom, and you can kind of go over it. You got Cade Cunningham, Brandon Miller, Keegan Murray, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren. I want to get your thoughts on this list. What do you think of it?
I'll start without addressing the elephant in the room first. I'll go from 5 to 2. Chet being 5 is generally pretty surprising to me. I feel like he would be a pretty easy 2 or 3 here, if not even 1. Just based on how people talk about him, like the whole comparison with a guy, like the fact that it was a debate between him and Victor Wembanyama really shows like how special of a prospect Chet Holmgren is. I mean, I'll be the first to admit I wasn't extremely high on Chet coming into the league. I thought he was too thin, and I didn't think his game would translate to the NBA, and I have been proven immensely wrong, right? Like I remember literally like the first it wasn't even the first like Vegas Summer League game. I think it was like that Utah Summer League. I knew that like that moment he started looking like Kevin Durant out there. I was like, okay, I was wrong, right? So I think Chet I would honestly have higher on this list, especially over a guy like Keegan Murray, who I know I have a little bit of a history with Sacramento fans. Historically, I'm not seen as a big Keegan Murray supporter, but I actually am a pretty big fan of his. Yeah, I know. I am actually a pretty big fan of his game. I just don't necessarily believe in his ceiling being incredibly high. Like if you look at all the players on this list, I can see a Brandon Miller being a perennial all-star, 100%. Especially based on how he played last year, his size, his overall offensive feel for the game. He's a little more aggressive than a Keegan Murray is, although they have like similar builds. He plays a lot different than Keegan does. Keegan doesn't really demand the ball and doesn't have as much on the ball shot creation that Brandon Miller does. So him being 2 is justifiable to me. If it were me, I would have put Keegan Murray 5. And that's not a slight on Keegan Murray. I really do think he's going to be a player that lasts like 10, 15 years in the league and probably sustains a pretty decent level of production throughout his entire career. It's just the fact that I don't see his ceiling being like an all NBA guy. Like I think his ceiling is really similar to a guy like Chris Middleton. You know what I mean? Like where that's a really valuable player, even on a championship team, that's a really valuable player. But do I think he's ever going to be like a serious star in the NBA? No, not necessarily. And I think Jalen Williams, though, is a guy who does have that type of potential. He's someone who, amongst like that draft crowd and amongst like the NBA nerds, he's a bit divisive because there's people who are extremely bullishly high on him. Like they believe he can be like one of the best young stars in the entire NBA, and they think his ceiling is immensely high. I remember people were saying his ceiling was higher than Cade Cunningham's. I would not go that far. But at the same time, like I can't deny the fact that he's a really special prospect. And I think if we're talking as far as like intangibles and everything, like his overall attitude towards the game is undeniable. Like his energy he has on the game. If you ever watch an OKC game, like the whole crowd's barking, he gets the team involved. Like those are things that go beyond just basketball. And it's almost like this intangible, innate thing that you either have or don't have. And Jalen Williams is one of those players that like, yes, he's a great bucket getter. Like he's a great bucket getter. I think he's a respectable two-way player, and I think his ceiling is pretty high. I would have him 3 here, or I would keep him 4. I would have Chet Holmgren 3, and I'd have Keegan Murray 5. And then as far as Cade, I don't know what more I could say than I haven't already said about Cade Cunningham. I am someone who I've been a fan of Cade's game since like 2020, and I've never been someone who's like watched high school sports, you know what I mean, like on like a level where I'm like, oh, this guy's coming out of high school, he's gonna be really special, unless it's like a Zion Williamson or like Chet Holmgren. Actually, I did watch in high school, Imani Bates, like those types of guys. Cade Cunningham was one of those guys for me where I was like, I was aware of him before he even got into college, and just knowing how well he feels like the game out and how his pace is unshakable is such a rare quality to me. I think his overall feel for the game is on the level of like the very best in the league. Like I remember year 1, he was going bucket for bucket with KD. Like most rookies can't do that. And I think the only reason he's not talked about as the generational prospect I really do believe he is because of the team. if I'm going to be completely honest. He hasn't been put in a position, and I think anybody watching this either knows this or has an opinion on this, that he hasn't really been put in the right position to like explode into stardom. Like he hasn't been put in the position to maximize his potential because there's been so much put on his plate from literally day one. Like day one, he was seen as the savior of this franchise. And unless you're LeBron James, that's not going to happen. And like Cade Cunningham, I believe, is an incredibly special prospect. I don't even know if like LeBron could have survived like in the modern NBA with the teams that Cade had been given. And it's not even to say the talent necessarily has always been bad on these teams. It's just that when I'm on the podcast with Koo, this phrase is brought up a lot, is like basketball sense. The teams in the past have not made any basketball sense. Like it could be good talent, but it doesn't fit together well. And I think when you're putting a team around Cade, because that's what they have been doing the last few years, is putting a team around Cade, you have to think about what maximizes his skill set. And when you put him out there as one of 1.5 shooters or 2 shooters at most, you're not putting anyone in the position to win. Like that's just, unless you even have Curry out there. And even then, that's still like a struggle. You know what I mean? I really just, I feel like he hasn't been put in the right positions to fully display how special of a prospect he is. And even then, he's still listed at number 1 here because he has been able to show flashes of how great he can be. Like he had honestly a great season this past year while being on historically one of the worst teams in NBA history. So I think Cade is just a guy that a lot of people, I say this with like some of my friends, I feel like Cade is a perfect barometer of where I view your basketball intelligence. Like if you're incredibly low on Cade and you think like, oh, his team hasn't won any games, so clearly he's not good, I kind of know where you are. And then if you're like, I think he hasn't really been put in the position to win and he hasn't been put in the position to succeed, I think we, like it's a general gauge of like where you are. So I 100% agree with Cade being number 1 here.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that, we were getting any kind of love from Bleacher Report and that Cade was one. It kind of shocked me. I think the list, you could probably, have them in any which order. I would actually take Keegan Murray out of this list completely because I don't think he has the tools to become a star. I think, to your point, he's a good B player, like a Chris Middleton type, I think you said. I don't think he'll flourish in Sacramento. Like if he went to another team, maybe he could put up 20 points a game, but I don't think he's a star. I personally, if I had to take him out and replace him with somebody, you could talk me into Victor Wembanyama. You could talk me into Shaedon Sharpe, who I'm really high on. I think Shaedon Sharpe has a gear that we haven't even seen yet, personally. Yeah. And he's kind of like Cade. He's kind of in that same kind of situation where, there's talented guys around him, but like basketball wise and basketball sense, it just doesn't fit, and the cohesion just doesn't make any type of sense. Like I had Sean Murphy on, I believe 2 weeks ago, and he read a stat to me that blew my mind. You know how many teammates Cade Cunningham has had in his 3 years in Detroit?
It's got to be. I know the Pistons had over 30 people on their roster this year, and that's not to count. I would probably say like close to 60?
70.
Damn.
More wins than he's had in Detroit. Cade's had 32 wins since he's been in Detroit, or something like that. I think that's what the stat news record was, like 32 and something. But he's had 70 plus teammates. I was just like, man, that's all kind of sideways. And then you look at how many games Troy Weaver won. He won 72. So 70 players that Cade's had, 72 wins. It's just like, wow, holy crap. Like, just malpractice on Troy Weaver's part. I get what Troy was trying to do. He was trying to get talent around Cade, but the talent just never fit with him. Like, you need spacing around him. Like, he still averaged 22, 7.5 assists and 4 rebounds on historically bad spacing and shooters around him. Like, you give him actual spacing, who's to say he can't get up to 26 points a game?
I think that's extremely tangible for Cade. Like, I really feel like he's a guy who can be like a 26, 27, 5-6 rebounds, 8-9 assists. I could even go as far as double-digit assists and I really do believe, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but I think this year he has the best opportunity to explode into stardom because the team around him, whatever you want to put their win total at is whatever you want to put their win total at, makes more basketball sense than it has in any year before.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really high on Cade. Some people call me a Cade Cunningham glazer at times, which I will take that. He's probably the best draft prospect we've had since Grant Hill. That's just how I think of him. I'm not comparing him to Grant Hill. I'm not comparing.
Yeah.
I'm just saying the best draft prospect we've had since Grant Hill, because I think he's that special, and I think me and you were kind of like on the same wavelength. The Pistons just have not put a good roster around him. I mean, like I think I did like a top 5 list of his best veteran teammates, and it was like Jeremy Grant, Bojan, like Alec Burks. Like, dude,
Yeah.
that's awful.
I mean, even a guy like Boyan, like I will say, like the first year, I mean, really, him and Cade played like what 10 games together that first year, but that first stretch, like his efficiency was great. He was a great fit on the team. However, availability is really what caused that to diminish. Is because like that year Cade got injured, and then the year after, this past year, Boyan was hurt for like 50% of the time he was here up until the trade deadline. So I like if you're looking like at even just the names alone, I feel like it doesn't tell the full story. Like even like a guy like Alec Burks not really available during his time with Cade, like it's he hasn't really had, and it's crazy to say this, but like he really hasn't had true veteran presence that like he can learn from as far as like on the court. Like there's always guys I'm sure he can learn from off the court and who can tell him, oh, this and that, or like give him advice, but it always hits different when you can actually see someone who is actively at better or on your level as a veteran. And I don't think he's really had that outside of like Jeremy.
Yeah, and like even then, I mean, even the fan base was just like Jeremy's, taking his shots away, and Jeremy was kind of looking for his. But towards the end of the season, Jeremy was kind of deferring to Cade, saying, "Okay, this is your team. I'll kind of
Yeah.
defer to you." But I mean, to your point, yeah, he hasn't had the best teammates around him. He hasn't had a veteran that he can lean on. Try to get wisdom from inside the locker room. But doesn't surprise me that like he's in a top 5 list to blossom as a star. I think Trajan did a really good job of finding vets that can shoot, space the floor, and not make his life a living hell.
Yeah. Which is the bare minimum, but it was accomplished.
Yeah. I think we have one more Bleacher Report topic that they had wrote. I'm gonna see if I can find it. I think this was it. No, I think this was it. Here we go. So
Okay.
they had an article about the biggest wins and the biggest losses for the Detroit Pistons. So their biggest win was the Pistons re-signing Simone Fontecchio to a 2-year contract. The biggest loss was trading for Tim Hardaway Jr. So what is your stance on their opinion about the biggest win this offseason and the biggest loss?
I could agree with the biggest win because I think that contract still doesn't make sense to me considering Simone's like efficiency and his overall production this year. You can look up pretty much any stat on him compared to any other second year player this year, and he was unbelievable. And his fit on the team was great. He pretty much gave you everything you wanted out of like a wing of his caliber. So I really think like I was expecting, and I remember talking about this with some members of the media, even like PR. I remember just being like, I don't know, like where, like, what is Simone's like contract? Like, what's it going to be like? Because it was just like a guessing game, right? Like, it's like, nobody knows these types of things before like they happen. And I remember talking with like other members of the media and being like, where do you think he's going to rank on like the payroll next year? Right. I was like, where he's going to be on the payroll. And I had him probably like three or four on the payroll because I expected him to get a pretty decent payday because typically shooters get paid in the NBA. But not to say he didn't get paid, but I think it's a severe like underpay for his overall production. I think it's like a bet on him being a good fit here and getting a bigger contract afterwards. But I do think that would be a huge win for the Pistons. I remember being absolutely shocked by the number that he was
Same here.
given. But as far as biggest loss, I don't know if I would say Tim Hardaway Jr. is the biggest loss for the team because he still provides them like a very necessary skill that they don't have or didn't have a lot of prior to this offseason, which is shooting. I think if you looked at off seasons before this, Tim Hardaway Jr. would have been the only shooter they went out and got, like, i.e. Alec Burks, you know what I mean? But
Mm-hmm.
You now have guys like Simone. You now have guys like Malik Beasley. You now have guys like Tim Hardaway, where you have even Tobias Harris. Like you have guys, multiple guys who are known. If not anything else, they can provide shooting and spacing. And I think Tim Hardaway is going to fit that role perfectly. Whether he starts, he's on the bench, whatever it is, you know that when he comes in and gives you minutes, you know exactly what you're getting from him. And I think what you're getting from him is a reliable. And I think what you're getting from him is also availability, which is something they haven't had, which I know pretty much any beat writer has told you a million times is availability is super important, but it is, like there's no way around it. Like availability is really important. All the guys that they've gotten this summer, knock on wood, they don't get injured, but have been pretty available all throughout their career. And Tim Hardaway is one of those guys where, like, yes, he did have a divisive end, I guess, at his time in Dallas, much like Tobias Harris, but that's still a valuable player who was getting valuable minutes on valuable playoff teams. Like, granted, this year he was out of the rotation for like the finals and everything like that, but years past, he was a key player for them in serious playoff runs. So I don't think I would put that as the biggest loss. If I were to put the biggest loss for the Pistons, I would say it's the lack of a backup or veteran point guard. I think not having a veteran point guard right now or a backup point guard, a true backup point guard, is a serious hole on this roster. I think like this is a pretty deep roster, all things considered. Like they have players at each position where I think like if one goes down, they'll be fine. But I think not having a veteran point guard right now is really head scratching to me. And I don't know if it's like a waiting game they're doing or like, what if they're looking at guys that are available still. But I think the lack of having a veteran point guard right now is a pretty glaring hole, especially considering the fact that like we're talking about like guys like Cade, right? Or guys like Jaden Ivey. We're talking about that whole veteran presence thing. Like you have veterans now. Yes, absolutely. But can you name me one veteran point guard Cade or Ivy has played with that like has had a serious legacy in the NBA? Like has someone that like they can model their game after? Like, in all due respect to Corey Joseph, Cade, like he's the only guy really that Cade has ever had that like was a veteran point guard that he could look at. But even then, Corey Joseph never was as good as Cade Cunningham is now. Like that's just the objective truth. So I think not going out and even like, because if you want Ivy to be the backup point guard, if that's something they're planning on doing, that's fine. But I think even if it's a guy who's not going to get a lot of minutes, having a veteran point guard on this roster who can provide that type of presence and leadership, I think would do a lot. And I think if you're going to start Ivy as a shooting guard or play him as a shooting guard, then you really need a backup point guard, because I know you can stagger the minutes and you can get, Cade on the court when Ivy's off the court or Ivy on the court when Cade's off the court. But at some point, you're going to actually need like a point guard to fill those minutes. And I personally, if they're going to utilize Marcus Sasser, I believe he's better off as a secondary playmaker versus a primary playmaker. I think even summer league, like you could see like his skill set's not best utilized when he's used as the initiator on offense. He's always going to be at his best when he's just a bucket. So I think backup point guard would be the biggest loss if I were to have one.
I do agree with you there. I thought like the Patrick Beverly news, I was like wasn't upset by it as like some people were. I was like, okay, that's a veteran. That's someone in the locker room that you probably want in your locker room, but you probably don't want to play him. Like I can guarantee him and Stu would probably just like mess with people like all game. Like it just seems like those two would just be like best friends right off the bat. But I do agree with you. Like the backup point guard position is the $1 million question. I've had conversations is it Ivy? Because I don't think Sasser, to your point, is a backup point guard. And then you kind of get into those conversations where it's just like, okay, who's going to be the shooting guard? Is it going to be Malik Beasley? Is it going to be Ivy? I do agree with you. I don't really think that Tim Hardaway was the biggest loss. I think the reason why Bleacher Report had that was because of Quentin Grimes and losing him, I guess, quote unquote, because he was a young 3-and-D wing that the Pistons traded for. That was part of the Bojan and Alec Burks trade, and they gave up on him in like less than 6 months. I think that was more of like their sense on it and their stance on it, which I don't know if you believe he didn't want to be here because of playing time type of thing. I mean, I read that on the timeline, but I never like got that as like a confirmation. It's just what fans talked about. But I mean, I think Tim is going to be like a six-man, or you could play him at starting shooting guard if you want. I don't really think that, he's a loss to say, but I mean, I thought overall, like to your point, backup point guard 100%, I think has been the biggest loss so far this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, and on the Quentin Grimes thing really quickly, like, not to say he did or didn't want to be here or anything like that, but you can definitely see the enthusiasm he has going to Dallas versus coming here. And not to say anyone can really blame him for such, right? But like, it's pretty evident that like he was pretty excited to go to Dallas. And if you remember, because he's a pretty active Twitter guy, didn't really post much about getting traded here. Not to say he didn't want to be here or anything like that, but I can say you can infer, right? Like you can infer a few things, and I don't know. I just think the fit here with Quentin Grimes on paper was good, but in the short time he was here, it didn't really mesh very well. And you could see that on the court. Like he wasn't really able to find a role. And the role he did play, he was supposed to be like a spot up, 3-point specialist, or like, off the ball creator. Maybe you want him like guarding the other team's best perimeter player. Just didn't really work out. So I think you get someone in Tim Hardaway where you know what you're getting from him versus Quentin Grimes, where it's kind of like a question mark. So I hope Quentin Grimes can find a great role in Dallas, and I think they'll need him pretty badly. But I do think it was a decent trade for both teams. So
yeah, same here. Before we do get into the next topic, we do have to hear from our sponsors from Factor Meals. So we will be back after this message, you guys. You guys, I have to tell you about today's sponsor, Factor Meals. Warmer, sunnier days are calling. Fuel up for them with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for summer thanks to the menu of chef meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. Make today the day you kickstart a new healthy routine. What are you waiting for? With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, you'll have new flavors to explore. Crush your wellness goals this month with dietitian approved meals and ingredients that you can trust. Make your day delicious from breakfast to dessert. Stay fueled with easy nutritionist options. Treat yourself with restaurant quality meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon. Keep the kitchen time to a minimum. Factor meals are ready in just 2 minutes. No shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleanup. Now, if you guys go over to factormeals.com/Pistons50 and use code Pistons50, you're going to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off next month. That's code Pistons50 at factormeals.com/Pistons50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. Okay, we are back. Shout out to Factor Meals for sponsoring the podcast. I literally didn't try it until I got a thing from them, and then I lost like 15 pounds in like 2 weeks. So it's
wow, shout out to you. That's awesome.
I was on the fat boys over here, like straight up, man. Like when you get out of breath going up the stairs, that's when you know, like, okay, I got to lose some weight, man. Like straight up. I've been behind the computer all summer.
I remember that moment.
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, can't be getting out of breath. So these next round of questions are, no news outlets anymore, just questions that I think could be fun. So first question I want to ask you, who do you think will improve the most this season?
I have two answers. I have an answer of who I think will show the most improvement this year, most likely, realistically. And I have an answer of who I think, if they improve the most, what happens. I think Cade. I think Cade will improve the most this season. I don't necessarily think like all of a sudden he's just going to be like, 10 times the player he was last year. I don't think that's really the case, because I think the player he was last year was actually an all-star level player. I think it just looks differently this year. I think when you put him into different contexts where his game is the priority, where it's his team, you know what I mean? Like where it's seen as we have Cade as our number one priority, like very clearly. And we want to do the things where we are prioritizing his development, because he's still a young player who is developing. He's going into his 4th year, but really technically his 3rd year of full-time basketball in the NBA. And I think having guys around him that really complement his game, like a Malik Beasley, like a Tim Hardaway Jr., Simone Fontecchio, who he didn't really get to play with much this year because Simone got injured with like the toe injury. So he missed a lot of time. They barely played together. Tobias Harris, even a guy like Paul Reed, I think like is a great compliment, because he's a guy who can still switch out. You know, it's not a lot of shrinking the floor anymore. And I don't think you're going to see all those screenshots where Cade's driving into the lane and there's like 3 or 4 guys around him. I think you're going to see less of that, if like any of that, this year. And I think that's really like, it seems like the bar is way down here, but like, the fact that that's not going to happen this year, I think you'll see just how special Cade Cunningham is. And I think if this team makes a lot of strides, Cade will be in that front and center, like back to kind of where he was positioned around draft time, like in 2021, where he was seen as like this blue chip prospect. And, you know, I remember Bleacher Report or House of Highlights, whichever one, they did an interview with Cade around draft time, where they're like, you know, the year before it was like LaMelo Report, because they just constantly posted LaMelo. I think Cade has that type of potential where he can be a player that like the media kind of loves. He has media darling potential. It's just the fact that he's been in the least media friendly city, least media friendly team. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, he hasn't really been put in that position. So I think this year, of all the years in his career thus far in the NBA, is his best year to be that type of media darling. And then as far as who I think, if they improve the most, will impact the ceiling of this team, I think it's Jalen Duren. If Jalen Duren makes a leap this year defensively, and I'm not even just talking about offense, just straight defensively, if he puts in work defensively to consistently show effort to be a at least negative to plus defender rather than a negative defender, I think he is genuinely like the X factor here. I think his health and I think his defense are the 2 biggest things here. If he can stay healthy and if he can be a neutral to plus defender, this team's ceiling goes from like, I don't know, wherever anybody has it currently, to like, in my opinion, a play-in lock. I think they are a play-in lock if Jalen Duren is both healthy and improving on defense. And I remember, shout out to James Edwards, Vincent Goodwill. They do the Detroit Players podcast, which is a great listen. And I'm not going to steal any of their scoops or anything, but
yeah,
I do like, and again, listen to them. It's worth buying, but it's been revealed like during, like a lot of people discuss, like, is his health, like, was his health the reason, like, why he couldn't, you know, show effort on defense, and like why his effort on defense wasn't the same. According to them, it was not. It was just an effort thing. And I think him maturing, him coming into year 3, and I think him having a defensive minded coach who's seems like someone who's really, like, don't get me wrong, passionate and a player friendly coach, but he's really going to get on you about defense. Having a guy like JB Bickerstaff around, I think will be a great compliment to Duren's game. And I think if he can be that neutral to plus defender, this team's season more so resembles the first 3 games of last, or 3 or 4 games of last season versus the rest of last season. Because it's genuine difference there is obviously like a lot of roster movement, etc. But in those games where the Detroit Pistons were 3-1, legendary run, right? Jalen Duren was like the guy everybody was talking about as like a guy who started making a leap. He was seen as like, is this the next best, you know, big in the NBA, like outside of like Wemby? Is like this the guy? Like, is he going to be the best center in the Eastern Conference? Like, that was a genuine question. Like, is he going to be like the next big center in the Eastern Conference? Because the East doesn't like have anybody really outside of like Mobley that has the potential to carry like the big position for years to come. Now they have guys like Alexander Sarr. But still, like, Duren still has that type of potential. And I think if he's able to remain where he was, if not better than like the early part of last season, I think that the ceiling of this team improves drastically.
I do agree with you. I would say mine isn't Cade and mine isn't Duren. I have Asar.
Okay.
I think Asar. I know, like you kind of look at the what he had last season, and I think it's kind of like a cop out answer if you ask me, because like 8 points a game, and like if he goes from like 8 to 12, like yeah, he probably improved the most of the season. But I think him working with Fred Vincent, the way Trajan is like kind of talked about, like him being in the gym every day, and like every picture I see of Asar, he looks bulked up. It looks like he actually grew a couple inches too. Like the picture at Summer League where he's next to Cade, they're both 6'6", but Asar looks like he's 6'8" now. Like he looks a lot taller. I don't know if he did grow, but that would be a plus for the Pistons. But I think he's going to take a leap. I think JB Bickerstaff isn't just going to throw him in the corner like Monty did. I think he actually has like a clear cut plan of how he wants to use them. So my answer would be Asar. But to your point, if Jalen Duren takes a step defensively, yeah, it's a play-in team. He blocks like a shot, 2 shots a game, 100% could be a play-in team. And it could affect the team because he's due up for a contract extension. Who's to say he can't get $100 million?
Yeah, and that's a major factor that I feel like, and it doesn't necessarily get talked about a lot with players, but honestly, it plays a really huge factor. These guys want to get paid. At the end of the day, these are jobs and they want to make as much money as possible. And Jalen Duren is coming into a position now where his name was floated around in like trade rumors and, all these types of things this past season. And although right now, like he's seen as like a building block for this team, he knows that's not necessarily guaranteed if like his effort on defense and, his play doesn't necessarily improve. Jalen Duren's still incredibly young, but I think he's kind of realizing like he wants to be here and he wants to like make as much money as possible. I think probably the same with the guy like Jaden Ivey. Like at the end of the day, players want to make money, and I think winning is always number one priority. But before winning, sometimes comes securing your future, because this is life-changing generational wealth that these players can obtain. And I think if you can do your absolute most to obtain that, and if you're in a position to, you're going to do the most. So I think like there's a reason there's a thing called contract year players. Like granted, Jalen Duren still has another year on his contract after this. That extension can happen after this coming season. So I think that's a thing to watch. I think that's a thing to watch for really any player from that 2022 class is like, are they going to prioritize that? And it's something to watch for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of told people that listen to this podcast, like, storylines are going to be Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren this year because of the contract years. Like, I would pay attention to both of them, see how they do, see how they progress, see how they react to getting a brand new coach again. I think that's going to be like their third coach in like 3 years, which is wild to think about. But I like where your head's at with Cade and Duren. I just I don't know how much more Cade can improve to the point where it's just like, oh wow, like let's put him in a most improved player award.
And that's the thing. I think his improvement isn't necessarily something that's going to jump out to us, like people who watch the Pistons every year. I think it's going to be an improvement thing where like he can go from 22 to like 24, 25 points a game, and he'll be in that most improved player discussion simply just because the team got better, because people weren't paying attention before. So I think improve is kind of just a word used as how they're viewed. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
How they're viewed will improve, not necessarily how they play.
Yeah, it's not so much it's like a box score thing. Like you can improve without scoring a single point. Like you can improve with being like a leader or more vocal or stuff like that. So I get where you're going at with it. So staying with it was positive with that last topic. I want to know, who do you think is going to struggle the most this season?
That's a good question. If I were to have anybody on the roster, I think just on paper right now, it's probably Marcus Sasser. I think he doesn't necessarily have a clear defined role on this team. And as is right now, he's probably like the third guard off the bench compared to last year where he was starting at times. So I think compared to last year, like he doesn't necessarily have that proven role. And I think if he does have a role this year, because I am a fan of Marcus Sasser's game, I do think like he has the potential to be a maybe a Bones Highland type, like those types of scoring guards in the league. But I don't necessarily see him finding that role on this team as is right now. That's not to say that can change, that that it can't change and he can't find that role, but as of right now, I don't necessarily see the fit for him on the roster as far as getting minutes, and I think as a result, he will probably struggle in terms of getting minutes. In terms of players, I think are going to be in the rotation. It's hard to say honestly because
Yeah.
it's a new coach. You know what I mean? It's a new coach. It's a new system. It's basically a new team. Um, I want to like look at even like maybe even a guy like Paul Reed.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know what his role is on this team because you have an Isaiah Stewart, you have a Jalen Duren. Do you run like an Isaiah Stewart, Paul Reed lineup off the bench, or do you want to start one of them? Like it's a thing of like I think struggle right now is defined by who doesn't necessarily have a role like that's been defined on this team. And I think Paul Reed and Marcus Sasser are two of those guys. Not to say they won't or they can't. I just think right now they don't. And I think that's going to be something to watch going forward in terms of like how they adapt, if they do find these roles or if not. So I think those are two players I'd keep an eye on.
I agree with you with the Sasser thing. That's who I had as well. When you look at the shooting guard depth, there's no playing time really for him. And I get like Tim Hardaway and Malik are on 1 year deals, and Ivy's probably going to get a bulk of the shooting guard minutes, I would assume. Um, then you kind of have the conversations as Sasser at backup point guard, and then we talked about it earlier. We don't like really view him as like a guard that where you want to have the ball in his hands like every possession. He's good in like short spurts where he can set up plays, but you don't want him having the ball each time. I do agree with you. I think it will be Sasser. The Paul Reed one is weird. It's interesting. I did a depth chart maybe a month ago. I had him like as a third string center because I don't know. Like I had Isaiah Stewart as a backup center. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't know. I think time will tell. These Rico Hine runs need to happen because I need to see how they look together, man.
I will say those can be definitely deceiving. Based on like if you're trying to project how it's going to be in the regular season, because I remember a lot of people last year watching those Rico Hines runs were like, it's going to be the year, like this is going to be the year, and it just was very far from the year. It was the Wingstop year, as it's been dubbed.
Showtime Pistons, the Wingstop Pistons.
Yeah, Showtime to Wingstop. That's so I really that the fact that that was even like kind of the theme of the schedule release this year is kind of indicative of how that went. So I am curious though, generally like how this team is going to fit together and how JB sees a lot of these guys meshing together.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty interesting. I think so. This next question's a little bit probably easier. It's which of the new players will surprise the fans the most, you think?
Huh. I think this might seem like a cop-out answer. Tobias Harris. I think Tobias Harris is going to be the guy that surprises fans the most simply just because of how negatively he is seen in the NBA and how negatively he is talked about in the NBA. Like if you can go back to, the Pistons announcing that they had signed Tobias Harris or they welcome back Tobias Harris, those types of posts. Comments are full of people who might even be Pistons fans saying like, why do we bring him back? Like, what is he going to do here? He sucked in Philadelphia. I don't think Tobias Harris is a negative basketball player at all. I think he is someone who is going to make a serious difference on this team. And I do think, in my estimation, like you can make an argument for Jeremy, but I think he's going to be the best vet Cade has played with by far in his career so far. And I think it's because he knows how to play with guys like Cade. Not to say Jeremy didn't, but it took them a while to kind of get a groove because it was like, is it my shot? To be fair, it was Cade's rookie year too. So there's a lot of figuring it out. I don't think there's going to be a whole process of figuring it out this year. I think Tobias Harris is a guy that really like you can plug him into the system and he's going to fit perfectly. And I think the Pistons have desperately looked for a guy resembling his archetype for years now. Since they even like had a guy like Sadiq Bey, they ultimately wanted his production to resemble that of Tobias Harris. They had a guy like Isaiah Livers last year who they were hoping to resemble a guy like Tobias Harris. Now you don't just have a guy like Tobias Harris, you have Tobias Harris on your roster who is still in his prime. it sounds ridiculous to say because Tobias Harris is prime. Like it sounds like you're making it like an all-star. He's not. But that's also not to say he's not an extremely productive NBA player. And I think a lot of what happened in Philadelphia was more so circumstantial. And I think the circumstances of the discussion around his contract, the pressure in Philly, all of that kind of weighed on him to where he wasn't really able to be like the best version of himself. And I think he was unfortunately, never going to fit the contract that he was given. He's not going to be Jimmy Butler. Like, I'm sorry. Like at Tobias Harris's best, he's not Jimmy Butler. No, there's not a lot of Jimmy Butlers out there. That's why he's Jimmy Butler. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of hate towards Tobias Harris was misguided and misdirected. And I think Tobias Harris seems like a very nice guy, seems like an absolute sweetheart. But at the same time, you can tell he's got a serious chip on his shoulder and he has something to prove. And I think that's something that is in common with the rest of this team is like the perception of this team is so negative and it's so like in the dirt. You know what I mean? Like they have no real positivity around them. Like they're almost like a joke. Like the fact that Tobias Harris, when his contract was announced, I thought it was a pretty decent contract, 2-year, like pretty decent deal. I didn't think it was really that crazy. Was it 56 million, 2 years, 56 million?
Yeah.
In my opinion, I was expecting him to get like 2 years, 60 at minimum. Right. So I think Tobias coming here on what I view as like a discount shows that like he has something to prove. And I think this team in general kind of shares that attitude of something to prove. And I think Tobias has a lot to show. I think he's a productive NBA player. I think he'll be able to fill that role of stretch 4 wing player. And I think he's also going to be a guy that like you can rely on in serious moments where the game is on the line. You know what I mean? Like I think he's a guy that like is going to make an impact in the wins and losses column. And you haven't really had guys like that in the past. Like you had maybe a Boyan or a Burks, but like even those guys were and I'm just going to be completely frank. They were like absolute like negatives on defense. They were, if you had them guarding a player, that's a bucket, right? Like, and it's not to say like they don't have value. They do, but when you're miscasting these guys as like, I don't know. I'd say Tobias Harris is a really solid B tier guy. In my opinion, and this isn't even like a shot or anything, but like Boyan Burks, those are like C+, like those aren't like B tier guys, but you were making them to be, and that's just not their role. So having an actual B tier guy who Tobias is not an all world defender or anything like that, but can he guard another team's like best perimeter or like power forward player? Absolutely he can. Like he has done that actually. So I think having a guy who can do things on both sides of the ball and have that on ball creation too, like when Cade, has to defer to someone, Tobias can get his own bucket. Boyan couldn't for most of the time. And if he did, it took up most of the shot clock. Like Tobias is someone who knows how to get buckets, knows how to distribute the ball. And I think his overall fit on this team is so seamless that I think a lot of the discourse around that contract and his signing is going to age incredibly poorly.
I do too. I think it was Jeff Teague on his podcast. He said Tobias Harris is going to cook this year because there's going to be no expectations like whatsoever. It's like he could have a couple 30-point games and no one's going to blink an eye because it's the Pistons. Like no one's going to be paying attention to that. The reason why I didn't put Tobias in the lower third is because I watched him. I know what to expect out of him. I know what he brings. I know he's probably going to get anywhere from 17, 19 points a game, 7 rebounds, good efficiency, just make good sound decisions, not make a whole lot of mental mistakes. And to your point, I think the Pistons were looking for a forward like Tobias, to your point. They tried to make Zariq into that, and obviously that just was not his game whatsoever. They tried it with Isaiah Livers. That didn't work. Isaiah Stewart, they kind of experimented with it, him trying to be like this, stretch 4 when there's more layers to his game. But for me, I think the one player I think will surprise a lot of people is Paul Reed. Watched a lot of Philly games last year. Don't know why. Maybe because I just needed a new, I don't want to say a new team, but I wanted to watch some like good basketball, some
not
ball
depressing
movement.
Basketball. Yeah.
Yeah, not depressing basketball. I'm still a Piston fan, but
yeah.
Paul Reed like really surprised me. I was just like, wow, like Philly has a guy that is a backup center, is putting up borderline starting center stats while Embiid was out, who's protecting the rim. He could stretch the floor a little bit, play make. And I know for a fact, man, like he is probably going to be a media darling because I don't know if you've listened to some of his podcasts before
No,
that
I
he's
have.
done.
Yeah.
Bro, he's hilarious.
Yeah.
He's funny as hell.
I'm very much looking forward to talking to him for sure.
But yeah, I think to me, he's probably going to surprise some fans. Some fans know like how good he is. I think Tobias, I just know he's a consistent player. I don't think it would surprise me. But to your point, yeah, I mean that's something we haven't really had, like a power forward that can score at all three levels, is a plus defender. No knock at Bojan, but he was a traffic cone, if we're being honest, at that stage of his career. But I mean, overall, I think all the players will surprise some fans. I think, Malik Beasley shooting high volume from three. He's already kind of, told Detroit fans, hey, I want to bring that Detroit basketball energy back. I think Tim Hardaway Jr., when he gets hot, man, like, watch out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thug shake that Malik Beasley does also is going to catch on pretty fast here if the team starts winning games.
Oh, man, if he does that hit like a big time three and the game's close, LCA would just like erupt.
Because I mean, honestly, like, I feel like Malik Beasley is also like a great pick. Like, I think he's going to be someone that like fans, I don't think necessarily had like a lot of fanfare for like when he got signed this summer. He's always been because as and I'm sure you have this too, like you always have guys in the league that like you have like your favorite role players. Malik Beasley for like pretty much his entire career since like Denver has been one of my favorite role players to watch in the league just because I like how he plays and I like the energy he has in the game. So I think he's also going to be one of those guys that like I think would uh find himself as a fan favorite and find himself being someone that like the team looks for in important moments too.
Yeah, it helps that his mom grew up here and stuff like that, so he's pretty
Yeah.
familiar with like the city of Detroit and what it takes to be a Piston, like quote unquote. I don't really know if you could really say that like nowadays because like just that going to work crew is just like the pulse on that team. People still love that team, but that culture is just like completely like gone. And like it's not the same as it used to be.
No.
Let's see. I think I'd had. This is a good one because I think we'll have different answers. So,
Okay.
who's likely to get traded at the trade deadline?
That is a great question. Man, it's hard to say ahead of time, right? Because then
Mhm.
like whatever I say is gonna get interpreted as like me hating or something, and it's just
Right.
not the case. Um, if I were to say anybody, the safe answer, I guess, would be like a Tim Hardaway Jr.
Mhm.
Just because his contract is pretty flippable and it's easy to match. I think he's someone if he does get hot and like granted, if the Pistons are in a position at the deadline where they have to make, a decision where it's like, do we want to push for the plan or do we want to like, prioritize the draft? If they do end up prioritizing the draft, which I don't think they would, but if that does happen, like if they're not even in a position to make a decision and it's we have to prioritize the draft, I think a guy like Tim Hardaway Jr. Would be very likely to get dealt just because his contract is still pretty decent. I'm sure he wouldn't mind getting minutes on a winner. And I think if he gets hot, it's a lot of those things. A lot of the things in the NBA, honestly, are just perception and it's recency bias. I think Tim Hardaway is a guy who's kind of suffering from recency bias, where in Dallas, like he had a little bit of an inconsistent run. So that made everything he did before that, where he got the current contract that he's on, completely invaluable and completely irrelevant. So if he's a guy who can just kind of live up to his current contract, not to say his next contract can be even remotely close, but just having a guy that, let's say, I don't know, the Lakers, are like around the deadline, we need a shooter. We have 3 second round picks for Tim Hardaway Jr. Somehow
Yeah.
we have 3 second round picks. I could see something like that happening.
So I have a player in mind, and this probably isn't going to be a popular pick. I think it's Jaden
Mhm.
Ivey. Um, and it's not to say that I don't think that he's not a good player because I do think he's a good player.
Yeah.
My thing with Ivy is like him and Cade have not played a whole lot together. And obviously that's health. And then last year it was like coaching, which isn't Ivy's fault. But to me, I think he needs the ball in his hands to be effective. And I don't really know if Ivy wants to be a backup point guard. He always, says, hey, if I'm playing and I can help my team win, I'm happy. But like,
Right.
who's to say like they don't trade him to like the Brooklyn Nets, who kind of need like a point guard? Maybe you can get something from the Nets. Like maybe you can get him while his value's still maybe relatively high. I mean, the Nets have a crap load of picks to trade, and maybe you can get something from the Nets that you want. Maybe you get like a wing defender like a Dorian Finney-Smith or something like that. I don't know. I know it probably isn't the most popular answer. I know some people in the chat are saying Sasser. I got a feeling Sasser might be traded before the season starts, personally. That's just me. But
Yeah,
I mean, I could be
see
wrong
that
there.
happening.
But
I mean,
that's my pick.
honestly, like if we're talking about like just trades in general, I think a guy like an Isaac Okoro is someone like that either Ivy or Sasser I could see as like a sign and trade type of thing there. Or like, you know what I mean? Like I feel like Ivy getting traded isn't necessarily like a hot take anymore. I think maybe last year that might have been, but I feel like at this point, if he does get traded, I don't necessarily believe it would be a huge shock to anybody. And it's unfortunate because I believe there is a fit there with him and Cade. I really do.
Yeah.
I've believed in that since before the draft. I've always been a very staunch believer in Jaden Ivey's potential and his ceiling. It's just that with Ivy, and he's a guy this year where like it is really like a make or break year, maybe not for like the sake of his career, but at least for his fit in Detroit, is like, is it going to fit with Cade? Is his play style going to fit with Cade? Like, because I do agree. Like, I think honestly, his best moments in his career thus far have been on the ball. I think like you look back at like that Sacramento game this past year where like he had a huge, what was it, like 37? I want to say he had
Something like that.
37 points. Like he was electric, but he also had the ball in his hands most of the time. And unfortunately, if you have Cade Cunningham on your team, he's always going to get priority. Like that's just how it is. Not to say, and again, like JB seems pretty, at least outwardly, like towards the media and everything like that, seems pretty enthusiastic about the fit with Jaden Ivey and seeing his overall potential as a scorer, playmaker, etc. But I wouldn't be surprised if like come deadline, like let's say the Pistons are near like slightly below 500 or something near that, like absolute best case scenario, but Ivy's averaging like 12, 13 points a game, like 3 or 4 assists, 2, 3 rebounds. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to like maximize his potential and see and ship him off and hope you can get the best possible return as a potential buy. You know what I mean? Like hoping other teams buy on his potential. I would not be surprised by that at all. And I do think like defenders would definitely be the priority in return, because I know JB, I mean, there's no secret. Like he loves his defenders. Like he loved an Isaac Okoro in Cleveland. He would probably love a Dorian Finney-Smith. He would, like guys like that, he would definitely love to have on his team. So it's really like a game of wait and see, but I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, absolutely.
I know people are going to listen back to this and think that I want Jaden Ivey gone. I don't. I just think last year you wasted a whole year of development having Killian Hayes in the starting lineup and Jaden Ivey like off the bench. Like if we would have had Jaden Ivey for like all season starting next to Cade, I think we would have more clear-cut answers of, can Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey fit together in the backcourt? They haven't played a whole lot of games, and maybe it's a little bit unfair of me to say like, yeah, trade Jaden Ivey at the deadline. But personally, I mean, you look at the contract extensions, you look at all the young players that they have. One of these guys is going to be a casualty, and for me, I think it may be him. I could be wrong. I mean, he could trade Stewart for all I know, which I think that's not going to happen probably, but I could be wrong in that. But I do think one of these young guys will be a casualty with trade deadline thing because he didn't draft these guys.
Yeah. I mean, there's less of that emotional connection. I think also at this point, like a lot of what has happened with this team has been wait and see, right? Like it's like, it's a never ending Pandora's box. It's like this team could be this, or it could be that, or it could be this, or it could be that. And this player could be this, or could be that. But I think at this point with this team, you've kind of seen what you needed to see by the deadline this year. Not necessarily saying that's going to be where these players forever are, but in terms of fit on this team, there's only so much you can do. And there's only so much a player can improve on with one specific team. So I think you're going to start to see decisions made on these guys, whether it's they're staying or they're going. A lot of like the young players that the fan base has been attached to, I don't think like are necessarily like shoe-ins to stay as currently constructed, just because of how things have gone. And, you know, like the fact that, like, in all honesty, this has not gone well thus far. Like, it's not even a subjective thing to say that. It's objectively been very bad this past few years. I don't fault them. I don't think many people do. But at the same time, you kind of have to make decisions. And I think that's something Trajan's going to have to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like I said, I could have just said Sasser, but I wanted to be a little bit different, honestly. I know people are already pissed off in the chat, which, hey, man, it's whatever. I really don't care who I piss off, because I piss someone off at least once a day. Got one more question in here, and I think it'll be another fun one. So this is a JB Bickerstaff question. Who do you think will benefit the most from getting coached by him?
Asar Thompson. Like, I don't even have to think about that. I think Asar Thompson is JB Bickerstaff's like dream wing prospect. I think he will absolutely adore working with Asar. I mean, I mentioned Okoro earlier. I feel like Asar has everything JB liked about Okoro plus more. Like, I think he is objectively a better prospect than Okoro, and I think he has such an immense defensive ceiling. I think literally if he was on any other team in maybe even a play-in capacity, I think Asar would have at least gotten votes for an all-defense team his rookie year. And that's not normal. I hope people realize, like, the things he shows on defense are not normal. Like, players just don't do that right out the gate.
Yeah.
His feel defensively is like, we want to talk about generational. There's not many guys that can come into the league and defend and adapt to the game the way he did. And I think it's such a disservice to his skill set that he ended up just getting kind of put in the corner, and, you know, not necessarily like on offense. I should clarify, like, he was put in the corner. He wasn't really like maximized his potential towards like the second half / whenever Boyan got back is when, you know, things started to go downhill. But in the beginning of the season, Asar kind of had to be that like freestyle, small forward, power forward. Like, he had to kind of do both things, and he actually excelled. Like, the fact that he was such a prolific offensive and defensive rebounder at his size, like 6'6", and you're one of the best rebounders in the league, which was the case for the beginning part of the season last year, is absolutely like, I hope people don't forget like how special that is, because that's not normal. And I think JB looks for guys like that all the time. If you ever watch any Cleveland Cavaliers basketball game, the guys that he really likes are hopefully doing the things that Asar can do. I don't think Asar's three-point shooting will be nearly as bad as it was last year if he has time with Fred Vincent. I know he's coming back from the blood clot thing, but even then, if you can just put Asar in a role where he is guarding other teams' best players, able to grab offensive rebounds, and just be a Aaron Gordon level offensive player where he's just kind of playing that dunker spot, I think he's going to benefit immensely from playing under JB versus playing under like Monty, for example.
Yeah, I was calling him mini Rodman last year, because like some of the rebounds he was just grabbing and like the stonks he was getting, like I was looking, he blocked more shots last year than Jalen Duren, which I was really surprised when I was like on Basketball Reference. I was like, wow, that's kind of a problem, but I'm really impressed as a rookie. You block more shots than a center.
Like, it literally, like, all it took was watching some game footage of his. Is like, it's so clear to see like how special of a defender he is. Like, it's unbelievable. And as a rebounder as well, like at his size, is just it's unmatched.
Yeah, it's insane. I had Isaiah Stewart for this one. And the reason why I'm going Stu is obviously, I don't think he's going to be starting. I think Tobias Harris will get that starting man at power forward. But I think there's going to be a new carved role for him where he's more of that energy big. I know we talked last time you were on, like putting him in a Nas Reed type of role. I think that's the role that he's probably going to be put in. Maybe you have him as a backup center some nights. Maybe him and Paul Reed are sharing the front court together. It's just a two big lineup off the bench. I think Stu has a I don't want to say he has like another gear in development, but I could see him this year putting the ball on the floor more because I think last year that's something that he tried to do, but it seemed like as soon as he did, he didn't really know what to do, and it like kind of caused into it like a turnover. I think him putting the ball on the floor and passing, I think will be improved this season under JB.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like with any of these guys, having carved out roles, defined roles for them is going to be such like a massive improvement because when guys don't have defined roles and they kind of have to like freestyle or they have to do this thing where like they have to figure it out on the fly, it can go one of two ways. And most of the time it's not going to go well because players need guidance. They need a defined role. Because if you guys are just out there doing stuff, then you're not playing team basketball and you're not winning basketball. So I think Stu also is 100%. Like if I were to rank players as who I think will benefit the most from JB, it's going to be Asar. I would put Stu number 2, and then I would honestly like if Ron Holland can find his way into getting minutes, I would put him at number 3. I think he would benefit greatly from learning from JB because I think along the lines of like that whole dream wing prospect, like Ron Holland has the size advantage on a guy like Asar, where he has the longer wingspan, he's taller, and he can kind of do more offensively than Asar can. He may not be like the defender Asar is, but like still along similar lines as defensive pests and like offensive Swiss Army knives like that. And that's a word head coach Jamil McMillan used, like the Cruise head coach used Swiss Army knife for a guy like Tosan last year. But like Swiss Army knife is the perfect way to describe guys like Ron Holland and guys like Asar Thompson. I think those types, and even an Isaiah Stewart for that matter, like all are guys that like have that switchability that JB's going to love and have that defensive presence that JB's going to love.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how he uses these guys and puts them in rotations and staggers the guards because he did mention that. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Jaden Ivey had a good season, had a breakout season with getting staggered, having a defined role, not really getting benched for a player that's fighting for a roster spot right now. Like I think he could have a breakout season. You never know. I'd love to be proven wrong with the fit with him and Cade. I really would, but. I know you did say you had to get out of here by 9. It's 8:50. I want to be respectful of your time. But I want to give you the floor again to plug what you're working on your personal Twitter and over at Bully Ball for people that are watching right now.
Yeah. So again, at Real Bully Ball on all of our platforms, we do pretty much anything sports related. Right now, it's a lot of Tigers content, especially on our Twitter. But we do pretty much everything as far as X's and O's, personal stories. I have an interview with Ron Holland coming out pretty soon, where I was able to talk to him when he was at a basketball camp a few weeks ago, and just kind of like his overall year and how that's going to go and things like that. So I do pretty much anything there. You can catch my photography, my writing, anything like that on at Real Bully Ball. Our website is bullyball.net. And then my personal socials, which you can also find my Pistons thoughts, my Pistons photography. I'm hopefully going to be doing other like sports as well this year, like Lions and maybe MSU, because I'm still here at Michigan State my last year. I will be doing as much as I can, and you can find me at Zariq Xavier. I really appreciate you having me on once again, man. I really do sincerely appreciate it.
No, I love talking to you, man. I wish I could do it more often. Diva wants to know if you're doing a hype trailer this year.
So, okay, that is something for those who don't know. I always every year did a season preview like type of trailer for the Pistons. I don't think I'm going to do it this year, not going to lie. And it's not because I don't still enjoy video editing, because I do. It's just the unfortunate reality that Pistons content right now, especially in the hype aspect, like in a positive aspect, has a pretty limited ceiling. So I'm going to have to wait for them to show some improvement in order to invest my time, because right now this is all coming out of my pocket and my time. So I have to be able to see some return on investment a little bit. So I have to invest my time a little differently, but I still have a lot of Pistons content coming out soon. That like the Ron Holland interview should be out within the next week or so. So
Yeah, I mean, I remember this is like a total backstory before I even like knew who you were. One of my friends, Jerry L, used to follow you on Twitter. And I think this is when you were like maybe like 14 and like you got your Twitter like locked out.
yeah.
And we went to a Pistons game and there was about 3 or 4 cardboard signs, and it said free Zar Binks on the Jumbotron. And everyone's just like, my friend Jerry, I was like, bro, look, they're gonna freeze Zar on Twitter. He got his Twitter locked out again. Oh, it's just like,
Man, that was a time on Twitter. I thank God, honestly, I don't have access anymore, because I mean, I wasn't saying anything crazy, but it wasn't a fun time to be a certain chicken nugget man, if you know, you know. But Stephen A. Smith has me on him now. So yeah, man, it's crazy. Honestly, like thinking about how long I've been connected with like the whole Pistons community is genuinely ridiculous. Like it's been since high school for me. I've been doing those like season preview type of things and like hype videos and edits and all those types of things since high school. I think honestly, I started back in 10th or 11th grade because I just loved Blake Griffin and I wanted Blake Griffin to get his shine. And I feel like he was never getting his proper shine as a Detroit Piston. So it's crazy, like seeing how far things have come to like now being a media member and working within the NBA and doing NFL stuff a little bit now. So it's wild, man. It's crazy.
I'm proud of you, man. Like you've grown so much as a content creator and just as like someone that I followed on Twitter. Like, remember DMing you? I was like, "Yo, bro, you want a job?" And you're like,
Yeah,
"I'm down."
I do remember that. Yeah, that was crazy. That was like my sophomore, technically, like my first year really on campus at Michigan State. And I remember like having that conversation, and here we are, like, you know, not there, but still doing pretty well. I think both of us. So it all worked out.
Yeah, it definitely worked out, and I think we're doing better. But
Yeah,
I appreciate you coming on with us for about an hour or so. But we're gonna end the podcast, you guys. No podcast this Sunday. That's why we did one on Thursday. I'm just gonna enjoy Memorial Day weekend because after that, reality sets in, and it's just like, back to work. Damn.
Yeah.
But see you guys next week. Peace.
Peace.